you really need to be able to analyze the question and have this in-depth processing of the content, which is really important and you can ensure that you receive during interleaving. Hello and welcome to the Daniel Stevens podcast, where we talk all about productivity, study techniques, and lifestyle in general. Now, for today's episode, we're going to be talking about a specific study strategy which I'm sure a lot of you aren't using, and a lot of you could really use to up your study. And as we like to say, you want to work smarter, not for longer. You don't want to have to work for a long time, because hard work isn't the only thing that you need. You also need good study strategies to ensure that you're really using your time effectively. And that's really what's going to get your marks from what they are now to much better scores. So the technique which I'm going to be talking about today is called interleaving. Now, it is a study technique, and it basically replaces the common technique which I'm sure a lot of you will be using now to study, called blocking. And these are just some fancy words just to explain the process of how you study. So in the process of blocking, which is what a lot of you will be using, goes something like this. So let's say we're studying chemistry. Well, I'm going to go do 1 hour work on chemistry, on a specific topic in chemistry. And after that 1 hour, I'm going to say, well, I don't think I have it packed down enough. I haven't really learned the topic to its full extent. So I'm going to spend another hour on that same topic, and I'm going to get it down pat so I feel confident on it. Then after that, I'm like, okay, I feel confident. Let's move on to another topic. And I do the same thing until I'm confident on the topics which I need to be confident on. Now, this pattern is then continued and continued and continued. But before you do this, let's stop and let's just think about what you're doing. And there are other ways to study more effectively. So when we study, this is called blocking. And this is basically the process of saying, I'll complete one task, get really good at it, or complete it, or whatever. Once I'm competent with this, I'll move on to the next task. So this does, to an extent, work, and if you put in enough hours, then it will sometimes work. However, there is research which shows there is another way of studying which provides much more effective memory retention in students for a lot less time, a lot less time spent studying. And this process, as I said before, is called interleaving. So interleaving is simply mixing up these tasks. It's different to spacing. So spacing is when you sort of spread out tasks across days and you repeat them on different days. We'll talk more about that in another podcast, but it is different to that. Instead, it's mixing up tasks in one study session. So for example, to help us explain what it is, let's give each different task a letter to represent the task. So we can have, say, a task which is letter A, a task which is letter B, and a task which is letter C. And these all represent different tasks which I need to study in my study session. Now, the traditional process of blocking goes something like this. I go A, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep on doing A because I'm not competent with it. So A, then A. Okay, now I'm competent with A, let's move on to B, B, B. Okay, now I'm competent with B, let's go C, C, C. And you see, we're really blocking each topic into a block where we work on it until we're competent and we move on. Now, in contrast, interleaving is when these letters are mixed up. So for one possible example of how we can organize this, we could go A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. You see, we get the same amount of time on each topic. It's just we mix each topic up. Now, the reason this works is it really helps, and it is shown to help, that students who use interleaving are more likely to remember material studied the next day than those who use blocked practice. And this is mainly due to, over an extended period of time when our brain is working on specific problems, we kind of start thinking in patterns. our brain stops thinking as hard as it should be thinking, and instead it sort of just associates this question with pattern. So for an hour, I'm just going to be doing the same question, which is using the same strategy, the same equation maybe. All of this, it's very similar, so our brain kind of goes to sleep. And we're just put into this short-term memory recall, which is repeating what we did in the previous question. And in that period of work which we are doing, this blocked practice, we feel like we're improving because we're getting more used to the type of question. In fact, we're just cementing in this short-term memory a lot stronger. And we're just recalling the strategy we used from past questions. So, whilst we may feel that we have clearly improved our period of study over the time that we were studying for, give it some time and, this information might not be recalled as easily as we thought. But luckily for you, interleaving does combat this, and it really forces our brain to actively recall knowledge and apply different strategies and different analytical thinking in order to work out the question. So come test day, we don't need to know exactly how we're going to work out the question. We simply look at the question, and our brain will use that memory, which we've been practicing in our interleaved study, to recall and analyze the question and really try and apply different techniques to it. However, it is, as I was kind of touching on before, it does make you feel like you're not being as efficient. So it will feel like a lack of progress is being made, especially when you're doing interleaving. And it's actually shown in a study that interleaving practice impairs the performance of the practicing performance in comparison to blocked revision. But the benefit is it doubles your score on a test day the day later. And this is all from the same study. So whilst you may feel like you're worse off in the short term, it will definitely benefit you the next day or the day after in your test. So by now, you are probably convinced that this is the way to improve your scores, and I'm sure it is. But how do you actually implement it into your study? How do you apply it to your different subjects and your different study times? Well, it is to an extent relatively self-explanatory, and I'm sure you have an idea of how you can apply it so far from the descriptions which I've been giving before. But it requires some important reflection and dedication that you need to use within your study to ensure that you're constantly adjusting how much time you spend on the topic or what topics you're interleaving and mixing up. So for example, if I were to be taking physics, let's say, I could choose a topic such as mechanics, and rather than say I'm struggling a lot on a little bit of mechanics called momentum, so I don't really know how to use the momentum formula, and I don't know how to apply it to worded problems. Well, what blocking practice would normally do is I would just do, say, 20 questions on momentum, and I'd get that until I fully understand it in my mind, and I can do those questions without even thinking about them. And that's the problem. I can do them without even thinking about them. And that's why we're gonna struggle the next day or the day after with recalling that information, because there is studies which show that the harder your brain works to recall information, the better it memorizes it, the better it creates these pathways in your brain which help you memorize the information. So then, what I can do, if I were to apply interleaving to this same idea of I'm struggling on momentum in the topic of mechanics and physics, what I can apply to fix this problem and to more effectively study is that I can also do a range of questions from the topic of mechanics. So maybe I can do some questions on energy, and I can do some questions on projectile motion, and I can all mix them up with this momentum. Even if I am quite competent with projectile motion or energy or whatever other questions that I'm doing in this topic of mechanics, I still want to mix them up with momentum. So whenever I come back to momentum, I have to think again. I have to think, how do I do this? rather than just looking at my past question and going, oh yeah, I remember, I just applied this, and not even actively recalling this information. So, with that being said, this does pose some very good benefits, and especially for physics, which is one of the subjects, it's really important that we have this skill. You really need to be able to analyze the question and have this in-depth processing of the content, which is really important, and you can ensure that you receive during interleaving. If you go into the exam already knowing, say, the formula that you need to apply, you'll probably do pretty poorly on the exam. You really need to be able to analyze the question and have this in-depth processing of the content, which is really important, and you can ensure that you receive during interleaving. Now, it is quite difficult sometimes, and I'm sure during the first few times which you apply this, you may see some less results than you hoped. And like everything, it will improve over time. Your self-awareness of how long and the topics which you want to choose will become better. Like if you were to choose topics which are too similar or too different, or you switch through topics too quickly and your brain just ends up multitasking, these things don't really benefit us. But once we start getting this self-awareness and this reflection on how interleaving works and how it works for us individually, it does become a viable strategy for many things, not just studying for your schooling, but also for music, for sports, for a lot of other topics in our lives, which can greatly be improved by interleaving. So I hope you learned something about interleaving today, and maybe you can try and apply it in your next study session and really improve your study efficiency. So you're spending the same amount of time, or maybe you're spending less time and you're getting the same results, or better results even. And that's really what we want to do. We don't want to focus on spending more time to get better results. That's not always the case. We want to spend the same amount of time, but just get better results. It's all about improving your study efficiency. And that's really important, and that's something interleaving can help you out with. So I hope you enjoyed this little podcast about interleaving. Tune in next time for some more study tips to get those better marks in school. Thank you.